The rebroadcast of the Vegas episode at the beginning of the week is not simply a nostalgic treat for longtime viewers, it is a surgical reopening of wounds that never truly healed, a bright, merciless spotlight cast upon choices that everyone involved once tried to romanticize or bury. As those neon-soaked images return to the screen, Danny and Andre laughing too loudly, stumbling through a chapel that smelled of cheap perfume and spilled liquor, the blurred edges of their courage and recklessness blending into something they dared to call destiny, the past stops being a memory and becomes an indictment. Vegas was supposed to be wild freedom personified, the night when Danny and Andre defied expectation, escaped the suffocating choreography of wealth, reputation, and political legacy to choose each other in a way that felt raw and unfiltered. But the revelation that the officiant who bound them together was an imposter posing as Anita Williams poisons the entire narrative. What they clung to as an impulsive act of love now looks suspiciously like the result of orchestration, interference, and invisible hands shaping their fate for reasons no one has fully confessed. If someone hired that imposter, if that blessing was manufactured, then from the very beginning their marriage may have been less a leap of faith and more a carefully constructed snare. For Danny, the return to that Vegas footage is humiliating in a way layered far deeper than public embarrassment. She has always seen herself as a woman who chooses with intent, a woman who refuses to be reduced to a footnote in anyone's story, least of all in a world where the Dupree orbit tends to swallow weaker identities whole. To relive her younger self, intoxicated, laughing, trusting a stranger in a cheap impersonation of a family name, is to confront the possibility that her proudest, wildest decision might have been built on fraud. The insult cuts directly into her pride. She must decide whether to cling tighter to the mythology of that night, insisting that what mattered was her love for Andre, not the technicalities, or to face the darker possibility that someone targeted them, that her vulnerability, her desire to rebel against structure, was exploited. That realization breeds a quiet, simmering anger, not only at the faceless imposter but at herself for being naive, at Andre for not seeing through it, and at the wider circle of power that seems to infect every corner of their lives. And once that anger takes root, it demands an object. It is easier to turn on the nearest suspects than to live with the idea that she willingly stepped into a trap. Andre, too, is forced into an uncomfortable reckoning. Vegas was his rebellion, his proof, perhaps to himself more than anyone, that he could step off the preordained path. The drunken vows, the reckless trust in a woman who wore Anita's name like a mask, once felt like the first honest act in a life otherwise forecast and managed by people with agendas. But learning now that this symbolic break from control may itself have been manipulated undermines his entire sense of agency. If the officiant was no accident, if forces connected to Anita, Leslie, or their enemies arranged it, then his supposed defiance looks painfully like compliance. Andre's anger coils inward, anger at the unseen players, anger at Danny if he suspects she knew more than she admitted, anger at his own blindness. That kind of anger is dangerous, it does not burn out quickly but calcifies into suspicion. In trying to protect their love, he may start guarding himself against the one person he once believed he could trust unconditionally, turning every argument, every doubt, every inconsistency into possible evidence that Danny is part of a design rather than a partner in a shared escape. While this old wound is being re-exposed under the bright light of the rebroadcast, Nicole decides that she has reached her own breaking point. For years, she has upheld the unspoken code, project strength, hide fractures, prioritize the Dupree name above personal dignity. She tolerated lies in the name of unity, tolerated hypocrisy in the name of legacy, swallowed the taste of betrayal in the name of appearances. But Ted's latest infidelity, his latest disloyalty cloaked in excuses and entitlement, becomes the moment that finally strips away her patience. She no longer sees any nobility in silence. Instead of retreating behind closed doors to negotiate another lie, Nicole chooses exposure. She drags Ted's betrayal into the open and, in doing so, drags Anita and Leslie's complicity along with it. It is not a tantrum, it is a calculated detonation. She understands that once she pulls that pin, there is no returning to controlled damage management, no retreating into the comfort of a scripted family narrative. She pushes forward anyway, because her rage has evolved beyond hurt feelings into a refusal to be weaponized as a quiet shield for other people's sins. Anita feels the blow as both humiliation and treason. She has spent years recasting herself from singer to matriarch, from star on stage to gatekeeper of a dynasty, constructing and curating the vision of an aspirational black family whose wealth and influence are unmarred by scandal. She treats every secret as a necessary sin, every moral compromise as a small sacrifice for the greater structure. To have Nicole, her polished, seemingly loyal daughter, rip down that tapestry in public is to be stabbed with her own sharpened principles. Anita is furious not just because the truth has come out, but because Nicole has broken rank. In Anita's mind, the first and greatest crime is not infidelity, not fraud, but disobedience to the code of protection. Yet beneath her rage lurks a quieter, more corrosive realization: this moment is the harvest of seeds she herself planted. Years of emotional pressure, of conditional validation, of making her children complicit in protecting an image have now borne the bitter fruit of Nicole choosing a more brutal honesty. Did Anita create the very enemy now standing in front of her, an enemy made of truth rather than lies? Leslie, pulled into the blast radius, has long operated in the gray. She has kept confessions, facilitated arrangements, smoothed timelines, and buried inconvenient details, always telling herself she did it to survive, to belong, to maintain stability in a world where people like her could be cast out overnight. Nicole's exposure drags Leslie into a harsh, unsparing light. She is no longer the bystander, no longer the quiet assistant caught in powerful people's crossfire. She is named, implicated, forced to acknowledge that her silence was a choice, that her obedience strengthened those who used and underestimated her. Anger rises in her like a delayed explosion, not only at Nicole for making her a scapegoat, not only at Anita for years of casual exploitation, but at herself for accepting the role. From that anger comes a dangerous new potential: Leslie is full of what she knows. If she stops protecting them, if she decides that the only way to reclaim herself is to make others bleed, she becomes one of the most lethal figures in the entire constellation. The question is no longer whether she is complicit, it is whether she is willing to stop being their shield and become the blade. Amid these unraveling alliances, Kat drifts toward her own fault line. She has always been volcanic, all sharp edges and unapologetic reactions, using sarcasm, rivalry, and audacity as armor against vulnerability. For so long, her dynamic with Tomas has been framed as competitive banter, territorial tension, almost a game. But games are safe only as long as no one admits how much they stand to lose. On the night after the party, dulled and loosened by alcohol, Kat finally lets the facade slip in front of Chelsea. In naming what she feels for Tomas, the jealousy, the constant vigilance around other women, the restless pull toward him, she is forced to confront that this was never just about winning or proving a point. It was about needing to be chosen by the one person who seemed to see through her, yet never quite stepped fully toward her. That recognition is both liberation and torment. She is furious with Tomas for his obliviousness, furious with every woman who comes near him, but most of all furious with herself for caring so deeply in a world where emotion is leverage and attachment is a liability. Chelsea becomes an unwilling custodian of this confession. She hears Kat's raw, unfiltered truth and instantly understands how volatile it is. In their world, feelings are not fragile things to be protected, they are weapons to be stolen, twisted, and turned into gossip, negotiation, or blackmail. Chelsea knows that if the wrong person learns how much Tomas means to Kat, it will not be received with tenderness but with opportunity. That knowledge traps her. She is angry at Kat for putting her in this position, angry at herself for being too decent to immediately convert this secret into a bargaining chip, and angry at a social ecosystem where sincerity is dangerous. If she protects Kat, she stands in opposition to a tide of manipulation. If she exploits what she knows, she becomes one more predator in a house already full of them. Either way, she is no longer neutral. Her choice, whenever and however she makes it, will tilt the balance between loyalty and betrayal in ways no one can fully control. The converging tensions swirl around a single, unspoken theme: everyone is afraid of being made a fool. Danny is afraid her marriage is a punchline engineered by unseen rivals. Andre is afraid his rebellion was a puppet show. Nicole is afraid of waking up one more day as a polished prop in a rotten story. Anita is afraid of losing the illusion that her sacrifices meant something more than control. Leslie is afraid of realizing she surrendered her integrity for a seat at a poison table. Kat is afraid of her feelings being exposed and mocked. Chelsea is afraid of choosing wrong, of standing on the wrong side when the inevitable reckoning comes. That fear fuels anger, and that anger fuels decisions that are less about justice and more about preemptive strikes. After all, in a house where secrets are currency, it is always better to fire first than to wait to be targeted. The mystery of the fake Anita lingers over everything like a shadow no one wants to name out loud. Was it an opportunistic scammer who stumbled into their orbit at the perfect time, or was this an intentional operation, sanctioned or at least tolerated by someone shockingly close to the family? If Anita herself had any knowledge of such an impersonation, even secondhand, what would that say about her view of Danny and Andre's union as something to test, to mock, or to bind for strategic gain? If Leslie was the one who kept quiet about suspicious details, was she following orders or crafting her own leverage? Could Ted's betrayals, Nicole's suppression of them, and the resurfacing of Vegas be more entwined than it appears, part of a broader pattern in which intimacy is manipulated to keep everyone in line? As the rebroadcast rekindles these doubts, the already fragile alliances begin to splinter. Danny may start interrogating the foundations of her marriage in ways that suffocate Andre instead of uniting them. Andre, driven by paranoia, may launch quiet investigations, digging into records, calls, payments, past connections, and in the process align himself with adversaries who promise answers but demand loyalty in return. Nicole, having scorched Ted and shaken Anita, now stands on a knife's edge. To maintain control of the narrative she unleashed, she may have to double down, expose more, twist truths when necessary, and in doing so become the very architect of ruthlessness she once resented. Anita, backed into a corner, is unlikely to collapse gracefully. A woman who has traded in influence for years does not suddenly start confessing. She retaliates, perhaps by dragging buried scandals into the light, reminding Nicole of choices she would rather forget, weaponizing every confession ever made in confidence. Leslie, if she chooses to step out of the role of compliant accessory, can tip the balance of power overnight. A single document, a recording, a memory carefully recounted at the right time may tear through the family's deflection and denials. The question is whether her rage will solidify into courage, or curdle into a quieter, more corrosive form of sabotage from within. Kat's emotional spiral, if pushed by jealousy or exploited by those who sense her weakness, could erupt into a scandal that stains Tomas, entangles Chelsea, and hands their enemies a new narrative about moral decay behind perfect gates. A reckless kiss, a confrontation caught on camera, a misinterpreted moment at the wrong event, any of these could be twisted until Kat is framed as unstable, Tomas as predatory or disloyal, Chelsea as complicit. In a world so hungry for spectacle, real pain becomes lucrative ammunition. The irony is that what appears on screen is simple entertainment, the glitzy Vegas wedding gone wrong, the exposed affair, the drunken confession, is, within the universe of these characters, a series of triggers embedded by design or by fate. The rebroadcast is not benign. It is a mirror that none of them wanted to look into again, arriving at a time when their emotional defenses are already thin. Those who profit from chaos, from distraction, from a weakened Dupree front, would be foolish not to exploit this moment. Perhaps they already are. Perhaps the timing is no coincidence at all. If that is true, then every outburst, every accusation, every desperate attempt at self-protection is part of someone else's choreography, and the illusion of control each character clings to is just another lie waiting to be stripped away. So the gates stand tall and gleaming, but the rot inside is accelerating. Love is questioned, loyalty is conditional, secrets are bargaining chips, and rage is no longer an emotion to hide but a weapon to brandish. Each step they take to secure themselves corners someone else a little more, until there is nowhere left to retreat. And when every player in this intricate, merciless game finally realizes they are all both victims and perpetrators, both deceived and deceiving, the only question left is whose ruin will be televised first and whether, when that happens, anyone will still remember that once, beneath all the calculations, there was something as simple and fragile as trust.